Chapter 19. Jimmy came tearing up to the bicycle rack right after school. I got to stop by Connor's for a minute on the way home. Let's go. I remembered the last time I went to Connor's, I'd promised myself I'd never go there again. Bubba and those two foul-mouthed guys he hung around with were scary. I dug around in my book bag for a minute. I forgot my English assignment, I lied. You go ahead, I'll meet you at your house. I left my bike and started toward the school building, but as soon as Jimmy rounded the corner by the playground, I closed my book bag and went back to my bike. I rode slowly and kind of fooled around, but when I finally got to Jimmy's, he still wasn't there. I knocked on the front door to see if his mom was home. When she didn't answer, I leaned my bicycle against the garage and sat down in the field where we played. Hard telling how long I sat there. It was more than long enough to know for sure that there weren't any four-leaf clovers in the little clover patch where I was sitting. Finally, I got up and went to my bike, figuring that maybe Jimmy wasn't coming after all. Then I decided I could get his ball and bat out of the garage. I could throw the ball up in the air and practice my hitting while I was waiting on him. At the garage door, I hesitated. I remembered the day I went with him to get his baseball glove and how he said his mother didn't want anybody messing around in the garage. Then I remembered how he prowled through my house the time he spent the night. What the heck, I said. How can he get upset with me for going into his garage when he explored our whole house? The big double wooden garage door made a squeaking sound as I pulled on the right handle. It swung open just enough for me to get my head through, then something stopped it. I tugged again. A chain held it at the top so it wouldn't open. Turning my shoulders sideways, I sucked in my tummy and wiggled my way into the dark garage. It was pitch black inside. I blinked a couple of times, squinting. I waited until my eyes adjusted to the darkness. A small window, smeared and smudged with soap or paint, gave off the only light except for the tiny slit between the two doors where I slipped through. Feeling my way along the door to the wall, I tried to find a light switch. There wasn't one. Finally, my eyes spotted a light bulb in the center of the room. I moved to it and waved my hand around under it, trying to find a cord or something. A string brushed my hand. After chasing it around in the air, I finally got a hold of it and pulled. The light that flooded the room made me blink. My eyelids fluttered as I tried to adjust to the brightness. When my eyes finally focused, I realized I'd never seen so much junk crowded into a garage before. Our garage was usually messy, at least if we stayed in a place for any length of time, but you could still get around. Jimmy's garage was the pits. I realized how lucky I was to have made it to the light bulb in the center of the room. If I'd walked a little to the right, I would have tripped over 3 motorcycles that stood there. A little to the left, and I would have gotten wrapped up in the row of bicycles. There were about 7 or 8 of them lined up all together. I was lucky enough to hit the only path in the whole darned garage. I looked around for Jimmy's bat and ball. I figured he had them hanging on the wall like I did in my room. The walls were just as cluttered as the floor of the garage. There were shelves on 3 sides. The shelves were stacked high with boxes. There were radios and stereos, VCRs, cases of beer, and all sorts of junk. There was a book called Scared Stiff. That's where my autograph book went, I thought to myself. I must have left it here when I spent the night. Then, with a jerk, I remembered that I'd never spent the night with Jimmy. I'd never been in the garage. The only way my book could have gotten here... Suddenly, a chill raced up my spine. It seemed to start at the very tip of my tailbone and bristle the little hairs at the back of my neck. Then it spread across my shoulders, arms, and clean out to the tips of my fingers. Almost in slow motion, I turned back to look at the row of bicycles. Why would Jimmy have 7 or 8 bicycles? I asked myself. Why VCRs and cases of beer? And the first bicycle in the row was brand new. I walked to it and knelt down. There on the chain guard was a tiny scratch, a scratch left when someone lifted it over the rock wall at the park. It was Don Lyon's bicycle, and the bicycle that was stolen the night before last. My heart jumped up in my throat. It was pounding and throbbing so much I couldn't seem to swallow. My friend Jimmy was a thief. In a daze, I staggered to my feet and headed for the door. I had to get out of here. I had to get away. There was a big cardboard box near the door. Gasping for breath, I managed to get to it. I leaned against the box, kind of using it for support. Around the base, my eyes fell on a bunch of candy wrappers. I stared down. Lakeview English Department Fundraiser. That's what the labels on the wrappers said. I remembered Mrs. Whitbeck making us stay in class while she tried to find out what happened to Beth Farmer's candy bars. I looked inside the box I was leaning against. It was full of balls. There were basketballs and footballs and even dodgeballs. On one near the top, I read the label stamped into it. Property of Lakeview Athletic Department. On the shelf near the huge box were some smaller boxes covered with that fuzzy felt stuff. A sick feeling rolled through my stomach as I remembered Mr. Parsons and that man talking about the break-in at Jake's Jewelry. I looked at the boxes of beer and whiskey. I remembered them talking about the liquor store break-ins too. I was no longer in a daze. I no longer staggered or leaned against the box to hold myself up. In the blink of an eye, I charged for the door. Slicker than a greased pig sliding under a fence, I slipped through the opening. I raced for my bike. I had to get out of here. I had to get home to Mama. I had to... A hand grabbed the front of my shirt. It lifted me up. I screamed. My legs, still running, kicked and jerked. It was of no use. The hand held me. Eyes wide, I looked at it. On the arm above the hand, I saw a tattoo. It was a blue picture of a devil with a knife stuck through its head. Drops of red ink poured from the skull like drops of blood. Suddenly, Bubba Larkin's angry face was right in front of me. He was holding me so close that I could smell the cigarettes and beer on his breath. Where you think you're going, punk? I kicked and struggled to get free. Bubba's other hand went to my throat. His thumb and finger clamped down on either side of my windpipe. He squeezed. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. He held on so tight, I couldn't even smell the foul stench of his breath. You ain't going no place. His evil eyes burned hot as he glared at me. You ain't telling nobody nothing. He squeezed tighter on my windpipe. You even think about telling, I'll rip your throat out and make you eat it. Chapter 20. There was a sharp pop sound from the other side of the big wooden door. It weren't my fault, Bubba, Jimmy whined. Don't slap me no more. I done told you not to let nobody round this garage. I ought to. It weren't my fault, Jimmy pleaded again. If you hadn't made me hang around down at Connor's to tell Deputy Russell that I seen the old witch coming out from behind the Lyons house, I could have got here before he went snooping around. Pop, please, Bubba, don't hit me no more. It was dark in the garage. When Bubba Larkin dragged me back inside, he smashed the light bulb with his fist and threw me into the corner near the big cardboard box. I wrapped my arms tight around my knees. I pulled them hard against my chest. I cried at first. I felt like throwing up, both from him choking me and from the awful smell of his breath. I coughed and gagged. How long I'd been sitting shaking in the darkness, I don't know. It seemed like Bubba screamed and cursed at Jimmy forever. Jimmy kept whining and crying and swearing back at his cousin and telling him it wasn't his fault. What they were going to do to me was too horrible to even think about. So I concentrated on listening to the voices on the other side of the big double wooden door. There was the sound of a car motor. Bubba and Jimmy stopped their screaming. The motor came closer. My eyes grew wide. Somebody was coming. Somebody who could help me. I let go of my legs and lifted my chin from my knees. If they got close enough, if I could hear someone talking, maybe I could scream. I could yell for help. The sound of the motor stopped. It was close. I held my breath and listened. There was a woman's voice. It was too far away for me to hear what she was saying. She was coming nearer, though. Maybe it was Mama. I shook all over. Maybe she had come looking for me. I crawled to my knees and took a deep breath. I told him it weren't my fault, Mom, Jimmy whined. It was Jimmy's mother. I scooted against the door. She would help me. Moms always help people. She wouldn't let them hurt me. She was close enough to hear now. The woman let out a string of curse words like I'd never heard before. It made the language Bubba and his friends used that day at Connor's seem as tame as something you might hear at a church social. I swallowed the deep breath I'd taken. It made my stomach tumble. I told you two that things were getting too hot, she growled at them, but oh no, you wouldn't listen. You had to break into houses and that bleep, 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 bleep dentist's office. On top of all that, you let some dumb kid from school see the whole thing. How long he's been here? About an hour, Bubba's sleazy voice answered. What do we do with him? There was a long silence. I fell back against the box, shaking all over. Did you tell the deputy that story we made up about seeing the old woman coming from behind the dentist's office last night? Sure did, Mom, Jimmy answered. Tell anybody at school? Yes, ma'am. Only a few people, just like you told me to. How about you, Bubba? Get any reaction from the guys that hang around Connor's? I heard Bubba's evil laugh. Sure did, Barbara. They buy it? You bet. You know how dumb and stupid that bunch is. You could tell them the Pope was Jewish and they'd believe it. Jimmy's mom let out with another string of curse words. This messes up the whole plan. I figured it'd take a few days, maybe a week or so, for them to spread the word around town and get people stirred up. Then we'd tell them that the old witch caught Jimmy when he was riding his bike and threatened to kill him if he told about seeing her sneaking around that dentist's office. I scooted closer to the doors. I leaned my forehead against the cold wood and peeked through a crack. I couldn't see heads or faces, just bodies. I saw a woman's hand go to Jimmy's shoulder. Bubba have to mark you up a little, son. You know, give you a black eye and a couple of scrapes, just to make it look convincing. That'll really get folks hot and bothered. Some old witch threatening to kill a kid. She laughed. It was an evil sound. Then she cleared her throat. But like I said, it'd take him a week or so to get mad enough to want to go do something about her. That would have given us time to move the rest of this stuff out and fence it in Shreveport. Her thumb motioned toward the garage. Here's a note. When the word fence used in this context means to sell it illegally and get money for it. So if you sell illegal goods and get money for it, it means you fenced it. That dumb kid's messed up the whole thing. Now he's seen all the stolen stuff. We don't have a week. I could see Bubba's hand reach into the pocket of his blue jeans. I can shut him up. He pulled something from his pocket. It was blue with silver on both ends. There was a click sound. A long, shiny blade sprung out. It was a knife, a switchblade. I pulled away from the crack in the wood. I was shaking so hard the box behind me started to rattle. The water welled up in my eyes. Put that up, stupid, Barbara Weston's voice roared. I got a better way of shutting that kid up. Light flooded the garage. I pushed back against the cardboard box. I tried to melt into it, pushed myself so far into the corner that they couldn't see me. It was of no use. Grab him, Jimmy's mom snapped. Bubba latched onto the front of my shirt. I tried to knock his hand away, but he was too big and strong. He lifted me to my feet. Sorry you got yourself into this mess, kid. She tried to make her voice sound soft and sweet, but there was a coarse, evil tone to her words. She nodded at Bubba. With one quick jerk, he spun me around, then wrapped his arms about me from behind. I was pinned. I couldn't even hit him. I watched with wide, terrified eyes as Jimmy's mom took a couple of battery-operated lanterns from a top shelf. She turned them on. Jimmy closed the door. Then Mrs. Weston went to another box a few feet away. She pulled out a pair of plastic gloves. They were those thin, see-through kind that doctors and dentists use. She pulled one on. She turned to me, and wiggling her left hand into the other glove, she let go of the band. It made a popping sound when the plastic snapped tight around her wrist. The smile on her face made her look exactly like the devil tattooed on Bubba's arm. The end of chapter 20.